Thanks for staying up later. Dick SCHAAP is here, and we've been anxious to have him on the program for quite a while. He has authored more than 25 books, and mostly, I guess, we associate him with sports from his time as the editor at Sport magazine and his reporting for both NBC and ABC. But you've covered a wide variety of topics outside sports. One time senior editor at Newsweek, city editor of the now-defunct Herald Tribune here in New York. What's given you the greatest satisfaction, or is it even possible to say, subjects within sports or without?
There really isn't that much difference. I've always felt that what I'm covering is people, and what they do is secondary. When I was covering politics back in the 60s, Bobby Kennedy asked me one night, he said, do you miss covering sports? And I said, no, it's the same as covering politics, except the athletes weren't smart enough to lie. And then Bobby laughed.
And you always, when you have been covering sports, always tried to focus on the personal stories or on some aspect of sports that transcended the score. I recall when you were the editor of Sport magazine in the early 70s, you tried to take it in a different direction than who's a better second baseman, Johnny Temple or Dick McAuliffe.
Right, because I never felt that I was an expert at that. I felt that there were experts, and I could ask them who was the better second baseman, but I felt I was pretty good at understanding people, and I was pretty good at writing about what makes people tick, and that's really what I cared about. Those were the kind of writers I looked for. When I was editing Sport, for instance, we had Pat Conroy writing for us, who wrote The Prince of Tides, not a bad writer. We had Breslin, we had William Buckley. We had some pretty classy writers.
You wrote several stories about Muhammad Ali, but my favorite was the one about the young Ali, when he was still Cassius Clay, when you and he walked through Harlem.
Oh, that was wonderful. I met him before he went to Rome to fight in the Olympics in 1960. And he told me the first time I met him that he was going to be the greatest of all time. And me, I believed him, and he was right. But when he came back from Rome after winning the Olympic championship, I met him at the airport. And this was in 1960. His name was Cassius Clay, and the airport's name was Idlewild. And within 5 years, both he and the airport had changed their names. We went out that night to celebrate. He was amazed that everywhere we went in New York, people recognized him. Of course, the fact that he was wearing his Olympic blazer with the letters USA about 10 inches high had something to do with it. Plus, he had the gold medal around his neck, which he hadn't taken off in something like 72 hours. And we had a wonderful time. And then I went down to Louisville and spent time with him there, too.
Yeah, just the other day, I picked this book up, Sport, which was published when? It's a collection of your columns on various subjects, not just sports. It's been around a while.
About 15 years.
Okay, and I had read it before, but I reread it this past week, and the passage about Ali walking down the street and seeing some sort of a street corner preacher or street corner politician talking about black power, and the way it struck him at that point in his life was really poignant in retrospect.
Yes, I mean, he couldn't believe that a man would stand on the corner of 125th Street and 7th Avenue and give people a message which now seems so mild. He was just telling them to buy black. And young Cassius Clay at 18 years old couldn't believe that a black man could get up in public and say that. And, of course, in the years to come, Muhammad Ali got up and things and with much greater impact.
A different kind of sports anti-hero, probably not with the depth of sociological significance, but a lot of fun for a while, was Joe Namath. And you co-hosted a TV show with Namath for a while here in New York. Yeah,
well, we had a lot of that. I mean, Joe obviously was a world apart from Muhammad Ali, except that they both could relate very well to people. But Joe wasn't concerned with politics or sociology. In fact, he wasn't concerned with yesterday or tomorrow. Today was for Joe. And when we had a show, it was unlike any talk show that ever existed because, for one thing, they would open the bar in the dressing room about an hour before we went on the air. I mean, a lot of shows will open it up afterwards, but Joe opened it up before. And he let me do the booking of the guests on the show. And we would each week have one sports guest and one non-sports guest. And I would always try to make it as interesting a juxtaposition as possible. And my favorite was the week that we had Rocky Graziano on with Truman Capote.
and the Rock says, Truman, this whole breakfast at Tiffany's thing, I mean,
Yeah, well, you know, Rocky never was very much into the Southern school of writing, and it was a whole new world to him.
Thought Faulkner was overrated, the whole thing.
Right, but Capote got right into the sports spirit and started telling us what a great athlete he was. And he said, for instance, I played center field on my boarding school football team. And we thought that was wonderful. We thought that was good. And he said,
did he know he was being funny?
No. And then he said, and I used to arm wrestle with Bogey, and I used to beat Bogey all the time. At which point, Rocky turned to him and said, didn't I fight you a 6-rounder in Newark once?
It's a great natural sense of humor that Graziano had.
Oh, yeah, Rocky. The first time I ever met Rocky was after he had retired from fighting, and I was going to write a story with him. about he was going to make a comeback, and the story was called, "For $50,000, I'd fight any one of these bums." So the first time I meet him, I walk into his agent's office, and he's sitting there, and I said, "Boy," I said, "you look great." I said, "Did you work out at all?" He said, "Oh, I woke up a Gotham." I said, "Excuse me?" He said, "I woke up a Gotham." And the agent said, "He says he works out at the Gotham Health Club." I said, "What do you do there?" He said, "I work out there with Paul Newman, Ben Gazzara, Tony Franciosa." And this was the time when Brando was at his absolute peak. And I said, "With friends like those, do you ever go to the actor's studio?" And Rocky said, "Yeah, funny thing, you should ask me that." He said, "I went over there just the other day. I go inside, I walk up the stairs, there's 4 guys standing in a corner learning how to be actors. And you know what?" I said, "No, what?" He said, "They're all trying to talk like me." He was great.
You wrote a book with Billy Crystal right at the height of all that Fernando stuff.
Absolutely marvelous.
Absolutely marvelous. One of Crystal's standard acts is one of the most dead-on Alis that anybody does.
Yeah, well, that's how we got together. In 1975, after the fight in Zaire, I was hosting a sport magazine dinner to present Ali with an award as our Man of the Year, and I wanted a comic. And I wanted Robert Klein, but he wasn't available. So his agent, Pat Turk, said, "Take Billy Crystal." And I said, "Who's Billy Crystal?" And she said, "You know, you'll like him, trust me." And she was an agent, so I didn't trust her. But anyway, I took Billy, and I had never met him before. He came to the dinner. He was on the dais. I was the MC, and I said, "And now one of Muhammad Ali's closest friends."
Hello once again, everyone. Howard Cosell speaking of sports. Here he is now, the heavyweight champion of the world, Muhammad Ali. Muhammad, who are you going to defend your title against?
Everybody talking about Joe Frazier.
Muhammad, let me ask you. You first came out against Foreman. You held on to the ropes. But at least this reporter to feel that you're not so fast anymore.
How about the lot of nonsense? I'm still so fast, and I'm so pretty.
And Ali fell out of his chair laughing. And ever since then, Ali and Billy, of course, have been friends and have appeared on each other's shows.
Have you ever felt at any time in your long career, as we said before, in and out of sports, have you ever felt defensive about devoting so much of your attention to sports? Because, as you know, some people would say, what trivialities, waste of time.
No, I never had. If anything, I've had to be defensive about covering more serious things, because the athletes will tend to put that down. People in more, quote, serious lines tend to be so fascinated by sports. I mean, there's a great love affair between intellectuals and athletes, mostly on the part of the intellectuals. They want to know about athletes. They want to, and sometimes they see a mystique that doesn't exist.
In a general sense, what do you think is the most worthwhile thing about sports?
Well, I think it's the escape and the entertainment that it provides for people. Much more for other people than for us, because for us it's our way of making a living. But when you see the impact that it has on others and how happy it can make them, of course sometimes how sad it can make them do, but at least it provokes emotions. It can get them angry, it can get them laughing, it can do all those. It's such a wonderful diversion, and that's what I wish it would be. That's what I want it to be. I want it to be entertainment. I want it to be, you know, that's why, you know, so much of sports now is on the courtroom and on the negotiating table. And to me, that's important, but it's not fun. And I like the fun part.
You spent a lot of time with two fascinating characters, and both you wound up taking to the only sports event, it seemed, that they ever went to. One was Lenny Bruce.
Right. Who was the other one?
Bobby Fischer.
Bobby Fischer. Okay, well, Bobby I took to several sports events. Lenny Bruce and I grew up in the same town on Long Island at different times, but we had mutual friends, and I became a fan of his before I ever met him. He happened to be appearing in Pittsburgh during the 1960 World Series, and every night in those days of wonderful day games, I would go to the nightclub where he was appearing and watch him and introduce myself and got to know him, and I would stay all night, watch as many shows as he would give, and there would be maybe 2 or 3 customers in this little nightclub, and I'd bring sports writers back with me to paper the house. But the last game of that World Series, the 7th game of the 1960 World Series, I invited Lenny to go, and he had never been to a baseball game before. And, of course, that was one of the greatest baseball games ever played, the only game in the history of baseball to end a season with a home run. Mazeroski's home run. When it was over, I took Lenny into the locker room, introduced him to Dick Stewart, who was one of the few Pirates I knew well. Stewart sprayed him with champagne. The mayor of Pittsburgh couldn't get into the locker room after the game. Lenny thought it was, you know, just a great sociological experience, and he never went to another baseball game because how could he?
He had the entertainer's sense of timing and theatrics that said, hey, I've seen this game.
Right.
No point going back.
That's it. He hit the thing. With Bobby, he was there. I used to take Bobby to Madison Square Garden. He was like 15 years old. He was the chess champion of the United States. He had this magnificent, innovative, retentive mind, except he couldn't remember things like we'd go out to dinner, there'd be three of us go into a restaurant, he'd sit down at a table for two because he forgot there were three of us. He'd forget his home phone number, things like that. He didn't know how to get home to Brooklyn when he was the United States chess champion. I'd have to help him get home. So I took him, one game in particular I remember taking him to was a Knick game when they had the great Knick team, DeBusschere, Bradley, Reed, Frazier, Monroe, and they were playing Milwaukee. I think it may have been Kareem's first year, and Milwaukee, as I recall, had a 16-point lead with 3 minutes to play, and the Knicks scored the last 17 points of the game and won the game. And I took Bobby into the locker room afterwards and introduced him to DeBusschere, who was a chess fan, and DeBusschere said, you know, how'd you like the game? And Bobby said, it was good. And DeBusschere says, was it exciting? And Bobby said, it was exciting. He said, is it as exciting as a chess match? Bobby said, no. No way.
You know, some people are eccentric, but Fischer is nuts.
Yeah, he went beyond eccentric.
Right?
Yes,
He's nuts.
Yes. Yeah, oh, yes. He's fairly certifiable now. No, that's overstating perhaps, but no, it's not. But at one time, I got, through Peter Falk, I got Milos Forman interested in doing a movie biography of Bobby Fischer. So the three of them got together. And afterwards, Forman decided that he really couldn't do it because it would make One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest look like a movie about sanity.
But he wasn't crazy. I know we're both going to get sued here, but
yeah, I know we are.
He wasn't crazy in ways that were always amusing or endearing. I mean, there was a real dark side to this guy, right?
Oh yes, I mean this sort of surfaced after he became, well after he became world champion. When he won the world championship in Iceland, he was still, you know, a hero, and he was still a person who you could relate to. Then he became a recluse. He became anti-Semitic. He became even more paranoid than he had been before. And again, I shouldn't throw words, neither of us should throw words around like this, but I remember when he was playing for the World Championship against Spassky in Iceland, the first 2 or 3 games, he lost one, he forfeited another. He said the Russians were poisoning his orange juice. He said they had rigged his chair. They were doing terrible things to him. He said they were phoning in the middle of the night to wake him up. So I called a gentleman named Reuben Fine, who was an international grandmaster of chess and also was the vice president of the American Institute of Psychoanalysis. And I said, Dr. Fine, I'd like to do an interview with you. I realize you haven't seen Bobby in a year. You can't psychoanalyze someone who's 1,500 miles away, but I'd just like to ask you about the general psychological stresses of high-level tournament chess. He said, oh, that will be fine. So I go to his house. We set up the cameras in the yard. He comes out. I said, Dr. Fine, you haven't seen Bobby in a long time, and I realize you can't psychoanalyze him. Just tell me a little bit about the general psychological stresses of high-level tournament chess. He said, Bobby is obviously a schizophrenic. So much for ethics. Yeah.
What did Fischer say it was like when he was 13, 14 years old and defeating grandmasters who were in their 40s or whatever, and they're looking at this pre-adolescent who's just so superior to them that their egos have been crushed?
Well, I don't think he was able to put that in words. He was able to put into words how he felt about doing it. But I remember once watching a match where he was playing a grandmaster from Philadelphia. Bobby made his opening move, which was pawn to king 4, pawn to queen 4, his standard opening move, and the other guy's legs began to shake, and he couldn't respond for 20 minutes. I mean, he knew the night before what Bobby's move was going to be, but Bobby, just the physical act of moving the pawn, the other guy's legs began to shake. It's a tough game.
Have you had any contact of late with Fischer? Because as I understand it, he's skulking around in a fashion that would, you know, make J.D. Salinger look like a publicity hound.
Exactly. Well, the last contact I had, and I told this to Bill Knack, who did a big article on Bobby in Sports Illustrated, it's got to be about 10 years ago now, and I'd gotten a message to him, and I was doing something with Wilt Chamberlain, and I left word for him to call me at Wilt's house. And he called, and he said, are you really at Wilt Chamberlain's house? And I said, yes. He said, boy, I'd like to see that. I said, well, why don't you join us for dinner? And he said, oh, no, I'm not seeing people. I said, oh,
nothing personal.
Okay, yeah.
All humans fit
right.
into this category.
There's another, around the same time, I guess it was in the 70s or late 70s, he was training at Ambassador College in Pasadena. Because you do have to train physically, and even though he wasn't playing anymore, he still trained. And he began training with Dwight Stones, the high jumper. And Stones was fascinated by Bobby, and Bobby liked to watch Stones high jump. So one day, Bobby brought in an electronic chess set and asked Dwight if he played chess. And Dwight said, well, I know the moves. And Bobby said, well, let me see you play against the machine. So Dwight sat down and he made about 4 moves, and the machine had him in a desperately trapped situation. And the machine spells out the words, resign, weakie, you know, I've got you. And Bobby said, let me make a move. And Bobby leans over his shoulder and makes a couple of moves, turning the whole game around. And the machine says, you've played this game before.
Continuing now with Dick Scchaap, you know his work from ABC and NBC News, the pieces on 2020 and whatnot. And this is his latest book, Bo Knows Bo. Now, in a way, you made a significant contribution to sports literature when you wrote the book with Jerry Kramer, Instant Replay. It changed the way publishers looked at sports books. But now there's such a glut of sports books that someone might legitimately ask, why even try another one?
Well, this is a challenge for me to try to get inside of Bo Jackson's head. It was a departure from things I've done in the past. Also, he is probably the premier athlete in this country right now, just as a pure athlete. So that was a challenge. And frankly enough, too, he certainly is commercial, as Nike and Pepsi-Cola and that, you know, every other company can tell you. So I didn't mind. I mean, if he was good enough for those companies, he certainly was good enough for me.
Bo knows baseball. Bo knows football. Bo knows basketball, too. Bo knows tennis?
Bo knows running.
No.
Once I got to know Bo, I really liked him, more than I expected to. I found there was more substance to the man than I had anticipated. He was more thoughtful, and he's got some bad streaks in him, as he'd be the first to admit. After a miserable childhood, he grew up with a lot of anger inside of him, and some of that anger is still there. But he's basically a very, very decent person, and he has such tremendous love for his family, both his immediate family, his wife and his 3 children, and for his mother and for his siblings. And it's so real. I mean, he would much rather change a diaper than hit a home run.
A key element is the absence of a father in his own life made him determined to create a home life for his own family that would be exemplary.
Right. It's a dominant theme throughout the book, is the absence of the father. That is how he explains how good an athlete he became. He says that at his high school, McAdory High School in McCalla, Alabama, there were other kids who were just as good as he was. And I said, well, why did you make it? And they didn't. And he said, because they had fathers. He says, they didn't have to get out. I had to.
He was also, unbelievable as it may seem, a kid who was ridiculed a lot.
He was for his speech impediment. He stuttered. He still stutters a little, but it doesn't bother him at all, and it doesn't bother you if you're talking to him. But when he was younger, he stuttered worse, and kids would make fun of him and laugh at him. And as he says in the book, I always remembered which ones laughed, and they got a beating for it. He does have a very long memory. I would certainly never cross Bo.
His reticence with the press and to a certain extent with the public, and his tremendous physical gifts could lead someone to assume that he's not too bright. Now, without overstating it, how bright is he?
He is a very, very thoughtful person. He's smart enough to marry a woman who's getting her Ph.D. in counseling psychology, and bright enough to impress her with his intellect.
Is he aware of or concerned by the possibility that in the end he might be more phenomenon than great ball player? Everyone views him with awe. Even other athletes view him with a kind of awe that surprises me, and I know surprises you, because of his physical gifts. But in fairness, he is right now a ball player capable of doing wondrous things at any given moment. Right. He's not one of the 20 best baseball players. No, he's not one of the 10 best football players. He could be either, but at this point he's not.
Right. He'll probably never be in the Hall of Fame of either professional football or professional baseball, and I don't think it's going to bother him one way or the other. I don't think it's anything that he thinks about or cares about. Long as he knows he's making a good living, he's providing for his family, the kids are going to grow up. In his dream, they'll go to Harvard and Yale, which, you know, may become reality. That's what he cares about, not whether he ends up in if the kids go to Harvard and Yale, he'll be a lot happier than if he ends up in the Hall of Fame. The funny thing is, as you say, he's not one of the very best in either sport, but he is the best highlight film that's ever been invented.
This is Dick Schaap's latest book, Bo Knows Bo, published by Doubleday, about Bo Jackson, of course. And Dick, I hope you can come back sometime in the near future, because we barely scratched the surface. We'd love to see you again.
It'll be my pleasure.
Okay, Dick Schaap, and we'll see you later.
He's been making you laugh for over 20 years. He's George Carlin, tomorrow on Later.